Welcome to our program. I'm George Butler, and with me is Roger Stone, and he's attending and a speaker here. He's actually speaking at the JFK conference in Dallas, Texas. And welcome to our program, Roger Stone.
George, great to be back with you.
There's a couple of books that you've written, The Man Who Killed Kennedy and The Case Against LBJ. Were there any other books besides those two?
I've written The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, in which I use fingerprint evidence, eyewitness evidence, and deep Texas politics to explain the role of Lyndon Johnson as a linchpin in the Kennedy assassination, essentially the drum major, if you will, coordinating the activities of the Central Intelligence Agency, organized crime, big Texas oil, and to a certain extent the big banks in the removal of John F. Kennedy. My book, Nixon's Secrets, is the true story of Watergate, very different than the Washington Post, Woodward, and Bernstein version of why and how Nixon was removed. It really a second coup d'etat. My book, The Clintons' War on Women, was read by presidential candidate Donald Trump, was employed in this campaign. It is the inside story of Bill Clinton's record as a sexual predator, a rapist, and Hillary Clinton's role as an accessory after the fact, threatening, bullying, terrorizing Bill's victims into silence. I wrote a short book on the Benghazi tragedy, laying the blame at the feet of Hillary Clinton. And then, of course, my book on the Bush crime family, which is called Jeb and the Bush crime family, the inside story of an American dynasty. Now, that book will come out again next year in paperback, retitled The Bush Crime Family, with a whole new chapter and section on George P. Bush, the land commissioner in Texas, who's running for governor and who will be the next presidential contender from the Bush crime syndicate.
Well, Roger, I'll tell you what, you first started with Richard Nixon at, 19 years of age? Would that be a correct
Yes,
age?
I was...
Tell us a little bit about those first beginnings, because that's really interesting.
Well, I first became interested in politics in 1964 by following the campaign of Barry Goldwater. I was very young, obviously, and I was 12 years old at the time of the 1964 Republican National Convention. The woman who lived next door to us was an active Republican and a Goldwater gal, and she drove from where I lived in New York to the Cow Palace in San Francisco. So I begged my parents to let me go to the Republican National Convention. They let me drive cross country with her and John Middendorf, later Secretary of the Navy under Nixon, but at that time the Republican National Committee man from Connecticut, and a major member of Goldwater's financial inner circle, got me a gallery pass, so I was able to sit in the galleries.
Oh my gosh, that was for you were 19 at this time.
I was 12 at this time.
12.
This is
I'm sorry. Excuse me. This
is 19.
I flattered you 7 years.
This is 1964. So there I am.
You were just
I was 12 years old. I was lustily booing Nelson Rockefeller at the podium in a famous historic moment. So, so I studied the Goldwater.
Sorry about that.
I studied the Goldwater candidacy. And as much as I loved Goldwater, I realized that he was not very pragmatic. And he, in a way, he'd gone out of his way to lose that election, going to Florida and talking about privatizing Social Security, going to Tennessee and talking about selling the TVA, talking about using nuclear weapons to defoliate the jungles in Vietnam. He scared too many people. I began to then study the 1960 election. And I realized after a substantial amount of study that the 1960 election had been stolen. That although Nixon made a number of egregious mistakes in his campaign, he still closed fast in the end. He had hoarded his money to the last 2 weeks, where Kennedy had been spending, balls out from the beginning. Eisenhower came off the bench and gave enormous rally speeches for Nixon in New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles. And I believed that Nixon won that election, that it was stolen from him in not only Chicago, but also in Texas, particularly in Texas, where the Kennedy-Johnson ticket only carried Texas by 23,000 votes, yet 95 Nixon Lodge ballots had been disqualified and burned in Dallas County alone. So I wrote to former Vice President Nixon, now practicing law in New York City. I was, at this point, I guess I was about 16. And I said, Mr. Vice President, you got robbed. You should run again. And if you do run again, I want to help you. Well, they obviously thought I was a little older than I was. I don't think they realized I was 16. But I got a nice letter back from the former vice president telling me he was finished with politics. Well, he wasn't finished. He was just biding his time.
Okay.
But that if he did decide to get back in the arena, he'd be in touch. 2 years later, I was contacted by a man named John Whitaker, assistant to Nixon, asking me if I was still interested. I took a train into New York City. I was hired to work on the 1968 Nixon campaign, specifically assigned to be a driver and traveling aide for John Davis Lodge. John Lodge was the brother of Henry Cabot Lodge. John Davis Lodge was the governor of Connecticut, the ambassador to Spain under Eisenhower, the ambassador later to Argentina under Nixon, and the ambassador to Switzerland under President Ronald Reagan. John Lodge was referred to Nixon as the smarter of the two Lodge brothers. He was an interesting guy because he was like Henry Cabot Lodge. John Davis Lodge was a very handsome, barrel-chested guy who had been a fairly successful movie star in Europe in the 30s. That's because he spoke French, German, Spanish, Italian, and English. And he was, it was his fluency in Italian which made him a viable Republican candidate in Connecticut. It's how he beat the Democratic machine.
Oh, there's quite an Italian population
yes,
there with
indeed.
Boston, right?
Well, when he first ran for Congress, he ran against the Democratic nominee was Colonel Frank Mucci, who had been an Italian war hero in World War II. But Lodge learned that Mucci did not speak Italian, so in their first debate, Lodge gave all of his presentations first in English and then in Italian, and of course that won the day in heavily Italian Bridgeport, Connecticut. In any event, Governor Lodge later got me a job as an intern in the Nixon White House. I went to work for one Patrick J. Buchanan. My job was cutting out newspaper clippings and pasting them to pieces of paper to be copied.
Oh, God.
I learned a lot from the Nixon White House. Went on to be the youngest member of the committee to re-elect the president. Was shattered by the Watergate scandal, which at the time, of course, I did not understand. Today, I understand it much better. The military-industrial complex really thought with the election of Nixon they were going to get their way. They thought that we would ramp up in Vietnam, as if the bombs Johnson had dropped weren't enough. They really expected the return to a Cold War. Nixon had a reputation as an ardent anti-communist. Well, lo and behold, Nixon turns out to be a peacemaker.
They wanted a continuation there. They
wanted more war.
More war
Nixon,
because of war material sales and stuff.
They were making a fortune. So the military-industrial complex was unhappy. This was not the Dick Nixon they thought they were getting. He negotiates arms reductions with the Soviets. He opens the door to the Chinese, God forbid. He refuses to approve a move on Cuba that probably would have ended us in a thermonuclear war with the Russians. Nixon is largely removed, not that he doesn't make mistakes and make himself vulnerable, because he does, but he's removed because he's a peacemaker, and the war machine needs to make money. So my book, Nixon Secrets, covers this. John Dean is the man who planned the Watergate. John E's the man who pushed the Watergate break-in. John Dean sends two former New York cops, Tony Ulasewicz and Jack, I can't think of Jack's name at the moment, Caulfield, to scope out, to case the Democratic National Committee headquarters 2 weeks before the break-in. So John Dean is the perp. I say that in my book. He's threatened everybody else who said that. And he sued a number of them. I would like him to sue me because I could finally prove in court that he's a liar and that he is the man who moved the Watergate break-in ball, but he has not, unfortunately, taken me up.
Your depth of knowledge and research amazes me, and your recall for these names, you've got it down. Your worldview is really insightful, is it not?
Well,
especially in this political arena, but
that's very kind. I mean, I have not had much sleep since Election Day, and it's only been 12 days because now is the new fight, and that is a fight to make sure that President-elect Trump surrounds himself with men and women who share his worldview, who are not neocons, who are not for nuclear war with the Russians, who understand the keys to revitalizing our economy, who want to redo these globalist trade deals that have destroyed our job market in the United States, particularly in the Rust Belt. I think he's a very courageous man. He's not a polished career politician.
No. He
tells you what he really thinks.
Right, he says it's plain spoken.
And sometimes it doesn't come out.
A little rash sometimes.
Sometimes it doesn't come out exactly right.
I think you were trying to give him some advice early on about his rashness, were you not?
Well, only Donald Trump decides.
Just be careful.
Only Donald Trump decides what Donald Trump will say.
He has his own mind, doesn't he?
He does indeed. But look, I have great.
He's a leader. I mean, he's showing leadership, and he's not the president yet. He's the president-elect.
He's got a lot of guts.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of courage. He's tough as nails. Speaking as someone who has negotiated several compensation agreements with him over the years, he doesn't leave anything on the table. Okay. He is very, very tough. And I think the Russians and the Chinese have met their match. This is the guy I want at the table when it comes to hard-headed negotiations.
Do you think that Hillary was tarnishing the brand, the Democratic brand, and do you think there was some higher level decision made to throw her under the bus in a way or not? What's your comments?
The Clintons are notoriously vindictive. Many of my friends in the Democratic Party, and I have many friends who are Democrats, told me that they felt they had to be before her because they didn't want to be punished. And that if she won, which they were all sure she was going to do, that they were famously vindictive. They also told me that she and her husband really had a lock on the money within the Democratic Party, the big money. And, of course, they proved that. They spent $1.5 billion in this election.
That's
now,
a lot.
Bernie Sanders was able to raise a very substantial amount of money, but it came from small dollar donations. People giving multiple times. He could never tap into the big money. The Clintons never saw Bernie coming. The idea of an 80-year-old socialist senator who's not even a Democrat really pressing her in a challenge was unheard of. Just like they never saw Barack Obama coming 8 years ago.
But now on Bernie, the country has sort of turned into more of to the left, socialist left a little bit than it used to be. That's why he attracted the people he did. Is America, the profile of America, a little bit more on the left, socialist left than it used to be?
Well, I don't think so. I think interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders' appeal and Trump's appeal on some matters were the same. They're both against war, both against the neocons.
Exactly, good point.
Both against the globalist trade deals like NAFTA and TPP that have destroyed our economy. On the other hand, the political messaging, particularly for young people, of I'm going to give you things for free. Everything will be free. Your education will be free. Healthcare will be free. And by the way, we have an 85% tax rate. We didn't tell you about that part.
Yeah, like the Danes pay 25% sales tax.
Right.
I mean, somebody pays for it, right?
So I actually think the country is still slightly right of center. I think that's where the political balance is.
But in the rural areas,
yes,
and that's what the Electoral College proved out, didn't it?
Yes, but if you add the growing number of immigrants joining the electorate, and you add those who are voting illegally, and I'm still convinced that was a substantial number.
This popular vote was not accurate.
Just not
accurate. No.
The only reason this election wasn't stolen is because at the end it was a tsunami. The numbers were too great to steal.
Yeah,
otherwise,
the black boxes they were holding back would never overcome
Correct.
the lead that he mounted in the different states. Is
Correct.
Michigan in yet or not?
Yes, we won Michigan by 11,689 votes.
I mean, I reviewed his initial announcement on his presidential race there in the Trump Tower, and David K. Johnston wrote a book, The Making of Trump.
Yes.
And there was like a hate fest down in Austin, Texas, a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
In a tent with 500 people in it. It was C-SPAN broadcast, and they called him a con man and this and that and all this and so forth. But it occurs to me that Trump wants to leave a legacy of helping America regain its prominence again. So his slogan, I believe, is he's well-intentioned.
Yeah, make America great again. Look, I think
again is the key.
I think
again,
he's going to be a president for the middle class.
Right.
He's going to be the president of job creation, of economic opportunity. As I said in my remarks today, if you get a growing, booming economy, now you have the money to solve all your other problems. You can now look at and there are worthy projects that on the social side that need funding. People who are mentally retarded need help. People who are terminally ill and can't provide for themselves need help. Trump's not going to let anyone die in the streets. He said this repeatedly. And even in the debate over Obamacare, he has said, we're going to have a system. But folks, we're not going to have a system that leaves the people at the bottom out. Everybody has to be covered. Everybody. That's not very Republican, he admitted. But I think he has a real empathy for average people. Here's a guy who's a billionaire, but he's not an elitist. Here's a guy with an Ivy League education, but he laughs at the Harvard and Yale type eggheads who've been running the country for 40 years, and they've run it into the ditch.
Well, the words to me that would conjure up my own little mind is that overeducated idiot.
Yes, that's another way to put it.
I mean, but there's much to be said about formal education if you can continue to expand your view and become more insightful.
Yes. On the other hand, I see these guys with advanced degrees. I think that sometimes too much education's a bad thing.
Exactly. They get compartmentalized and isolated into predisposed ideas and thoughts of others.
Yes.
See, and they just become like parrots.
Yes.
The world is a jungle full of parrots.
Yes.
And one day, I stopped being a parrot years ago, and I flew out of the jungle.
Well, George, now my next project now.
Okay, what is it?
It is to produce a book by Inauguration Day called The Making of the President, How Donald Trump Orchestrated a Revolution and Proved the Media Wrong. I have to have a manuscript in by December 10th.
My gosh, you're a busy man.
I'm looking at around 450 pages, an inside view of exactly how this election went down and what the decisions that were made that brought Donald Trump to victory. So I'm going to, after this conference, I'm going to go back to Miami. I'm debating Gerald Posner on the question of who killed John F. Kennedy. Posner is famously the author of Case Closed.
Right, Case Closed, sure.
And we'll do that Tuesday night. It'll be a civil debate. He's a friend of mine, even though he's wrong about everything. You have friends
on both sides of the aisle, do you not?
I do, because I think you can...
Because you're not a vindictive, mean person. You're very open to other people's views, too, aren't you?
Well, I think you can disagree without being disagreeable.
I saw you do that in New Orleans a few weeks ago. When someone came up with an opposite opposing view, but you let the man speak.
Well, he was just a misguided liberal. He had an idea that the Clintons believed in something when the Clintons are.
But you let the man speak, and you didn't call him down or anything.
No, one of the things that I find
you did come back with facts.
One of the things that offends me, George, is one of
the
things that offends me is I have now been banned on CNN.
Oh gosh,
I have been banned on MSNBC.
Yeah.
I apparently have been banned on Fox, although I have been a regular contributor. I'm not for censorship. I don't like censorship. Not censorship of the left or the right. Let everybody speak. Let the people make up their own minds. But this idea that you can't speak because your ideas are politically incorrect, that's not American. That's un-American. Everybody should be allowed to speak.
When they started making free speech areas on the campuses, I think the whole country ought to be a free speech area.
And the idea that fake
political correctness, my gosh.
Now that Google is going to be taking fake news off the internet.
Oh gosh, yeah. What do you
think? What's fake news? What is fake news? CNN, that's fake news.
Well, what you're doing is right at the core of truth And we certainly appreciate your work and this new book. I'm so excited to hear about it.
The Making of the President: How Donald Trump Orchestrated a Revolution and Proved the Media Wrong. Look for it. It's
I
coming
reserve the right for an interview
Done.
as soon as I can.
Done. And now
I got to get in there quick because you're busy and you're in big demand.
And now I hear a Mexican lunch calling my name.
Okay. Well, Roger Stone, thank you. And you're fastidiously dressed always. And you always present yourself in the best manner.
Thank you, George.
And you're a very kind and good guy.
Great to be back with you. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Roger.